Hello and welcome to a video on array methods. This is the first in a series of very powerful, very fun, very useful methods that you can incorporate into your JavaScript practice. Before we get on to these methods, it's really good to understand exactly what a callback function is and how it is used. So we'll have a quick review on that first. A callback function essentially is a function that is being used later. It's used by other functions, so there's usually the idea of a higher order function is taking place here. And it's one that we write, but the program, JavaScript, the browser kind of uses for us. So just to give an example, let's write a function right now. This function is going to basically say, we'll call this function call me later. And it's going to take a value. The value can be anything. And it's simply going to say it will print out what the value is. So console log, the value is, and value. And I want to print out, the numbers 1, 2, and 3, for instance. So we could do it like this. We could type call me later, 1, 2, and 3, and we get that printed when we run, but this is very manual, this is not very dry, it's the idea of do not repeat yourself. We don't really want to go in this manner, so instead, what if we had a method, an array of these values we want to print out, and we can just call a method that uses this function and runs it for each value. And that one exists, of course, it's called forEach. So we can dot this off. This is dotting a method off of an array literal, because it's the actual array there, not a variable. And so we'll say forEach, and we will just pass in the actual function. And that's a very important concept to get to, is that a function right here, whether it's a function expression or whether it's a function declaration, var call me later equals, and then there's an anonymous function there. Either way, and actually, either way, as you can see this running here, it will take this function, and this forEach method actually invokes it itself. It's very similar to something like this. If we were going to do this a little more manually, see it written out, we could say I equals 0, and let's actually make an array variable now. I is less than array.length, I plus plus, and then on each pass we just invoke call me later, passing in the index of array each time. And then of course it runs again. We've done that a few times, as you probably have used in the past. It's the exact same thing as using forEach, except we are not typing out the function to be called, the program is typing it out. So we've done it, with this 123.forEach, call me later. Another very common way of seeing this written out is we will just pass in the function ourselves. We will just take this out completely, and we will pass in the function ourselves. So now we're making an anonymous function that we just pass right in here. The value is, and value. Now remember, we are not invoking this function right now. Because we invoke this function, we essentially get, if we were to invoke this function, we would get undefined because we were not returning anything. This is just the actual function, the actual recipe for the function that JavaScript will invoke for us. And we get the same exact thing again. Now, what JavaScript always does, it always passes each of the values here in order as the first argument. But there's two other arguments that it's also passing in. And just like always, since we are not declaring those as formal parameters, they're technically available in the arguments object, but they're not available as a formal parameter, and JavaScript is just silent about it. But we could use these other parameters, and what it passes in for its second one, it always passes in the index number of the current index that we are on. So the value is here, and the index is right here. So I'm just going to make these so they're a little bit different from the index number they are, but now we can say the value of, and we'll say the value of index is, and if we do that, you can see that it starts at index 0, index 1, index 2, and it prints it out accordingly. And remember, these parameters can be named anything. You can name this nothing, for instance, as long as it matches, we still get the same thing. It doesn't actually matter what these are, but it's pretty conventional to name the parameters something similar to what's being passed into it. So I like using value or index, or sometimes I'll just do like val idx. It's always a trade-off between initial readability and saving space, lean code. The final argument that gets passed, it can pass the entire array itself, which is kind of an interesting concept. So this third argument doesn't change. Now it'll pass in, for the first pass, it'll pass in 10 for the value, 0 for the index, and then just the entire array that we are working off of for this one here. And it can be useful. I don't use it too often, but it can be useful every once in a while for, say, getting the length of what we are working with. So we could do something here like, let's calculate the middle of the array. And we can just say var middle equals, I'm going to round array.length divided by 2, and then if index, again another argument we're working with again, if index plus 1, I'm plussing 1 to account for the 0 index offset, is equal to middle, we will just log out as well. You're at, can't type today, the middle point. So if we run this, we get you're at the middle point here, kind of rounded up there. And of course, we can add some more. Maybe an empty array 3 in it, and another 2. And we get all these different values printed out, and the middle point kind of adjusts itself because the array being passed is a much larger array than the one it got before. And that is the very beginning of the many different array methods we can use. Keep watching for more array adventures.